The sound of the engine was like a lullaby to Mason Ray. The deep, throaty growl of the 600 horsepower diesel engine created a steady vibration inside the cabin, working its way into his calloused hands, gripping the steering wheel. Outside, the Nevada desert was pitch black. Beyond the limited area illuminated by the headlights, it was as if the world didn't exist. Only asphalt, yellow lines, and an endless void stretching into nothingness. Only asphalt, yellow lines, and an endless void stretching into nothingness. Mason grimaced as he poured the cold coffee from his thermos into his cup. The coffee was thick, as tar stale, but he didn't care. It was the only thing keeping him awake. His eyelids were heavy as lead. He had slept only 3 hours in the last 48. The logistics company had told him this load was express, offering him a crazy bonus to complete the trip. Normally a 3-day journey, in 36 hours. Mason had debts, gambling debts. The lights of Las Vegas had darkened his life, and now he was steering through these dark roads. To escape that darkness, logbook entry, time 01:30 a.m. Still on I-80, no traffic. Haven't seen a single car in the last 2 hours. The radio isn't picking up anything, just static. This damn desert seems to swallow you whole. The load is heavy. Sometimes there are noises from the back of the trailer, as if the load is shifting, but it's sealed. I can't check. Just drive, get the money and go. Mason fiddled with the radio. He tried to find something on the AM band. Usually at this hour, there would be pirate stations with crazy preachers spouting doomsday scenarios, or stations playing old country songs. But tonight, the frequencies were dead. Fizz, hiss, fizz. Just as he was about to give up, a clear, smooth voice came over the speaker. Jazz music. A melancholy saxophone melody from the 1940s. And then a velvety-voiced man speaking. And hello to all those lost souls mingling in the night. This is 104.6, dead frequency. I know your road is long, your load is heavy. But don't worry, we'll all be home soon. Right, Mason? We'll all make it home. Right. Mason. Mason jerked the wheel. The truck veered off the lane onto the gravel road. What? Mason yelled, looking at the radio. Did he say my name? He straightened the truck back onto the asphalt. His heart was pounding. Insomnia was playing tricks. It definitely was. The man on the radio hadn't said Mason. Maybe he said Jason. Or he said, listen. The radio continued. Turn right at the next intersection. It's not on your map, but it's a shortcut. We're waiting for you, Mason. We're waiting for your load. Mason slammed on the brakes. The massive 18-wheeler slowed with a screech. A sign appeared ahead. An old, rusted plate riddled with bullet holes. It didn't say where to go. Just a right turn arrow and a number spray-painted in black. Below it, Route 0. He checked the navigation. The GPS told him to go straight. There was no right turn on the map. It was just desert, sand, and rocks. But his eyes saw an asphalt road there, jet black, smooth as if freshly laid, glistening in the moonlight. "Don't be ridiculous," Mason said. "Listen to the GPS." He shifted into gear and pressed the gas to keep going straight. But the engine stalled. The huge truck came to a halt in the middle of the road. He pressed the starter. Click, 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 click. It wasn't working. The voice on the radio was heard again. This time it was more serious, more commanding. "You're running out of fuel, Mason. There are no gas stations on that road, but there are on our road. Come to us. Turn right." Mason looked at the fuel gauge. He couldn't believe his eyes. He had filled the tank 10 minutes ago. The gauge was now below the E line. The red light was on. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Is there a hole in the tank?" He opened the door, grabbed his flashlight, and jumped out. The cold of the desert hit his face. He checked the tank. He opened the cap. He held the flashlight. The tank was full. It was filled to the brim with diesel fuel, but the gauge said it was empty, and the engine wouldn't start. This wasn't a mechanical failure. This was the truck rejecting him. The vehicle refused to go straight. Mason climbed back into the cab. He slammed the steering wheel. "Fine," he said angrily. "Fine, you damn piece of junk. Have it your way." He pressed the starter. The engine roared to life, as if it had never been off. But when Mason tried to turn the steering wheel onto the straight road, the hydraulics locked up. The steering wheel wouldn't turn. It only turned right, toward that nameless road. Cold sweat poured from Mason's forehead. "All right," he said. "If you say it's a shortcut, it's a shortcut." He turned the truck right. He passed the Route 0 sign. As he passed the sign, he caught a glimpse of what was behind it in the headlights. Behind the sign hung a wind chime made of human bones. After turning onto the road, everything changed. The dusty, yellow vegetation of the Nevada desert disappeared. On either side of the road, enormous black pillars rose toward the sky. They weren't trees. They weren't telephone poles either. They resembled huge, charred, coal-black ribs. They curved from the ground to the sky. And the asphalt, Mason felt nauseous as he looked at the asphalt illuminated by the headlights. The asphalt was black, but it didn't shine. It absorbed the light, and there were no lane markings on it. Worse, the sound the tires made on the road had changed. Worse, the sound the tires made on the road had changed. Normally, wheels made a whizzing sound on asphalt. Here the sound was squish, squish, as if they were stepping on wet meat, mud, or a ground full of offal. He looked at the speedometer, 90 km/h, but the scenery outside wasn't passing by that fast. It was as if the truck wasn't moving. The world was sliding beneath it. The radio crackled again. The jazz music stopped. Instead, a very familiar voice came on. A woman's voice, She was crying. "Mason, please don't open it. Please don't open that door." Mason wanted to slam on the brakes, but his legs wouldn't hold him. This voice was his wife's voice, Sarah's voice. But Sarah was dead 3 years ago, the night they lost their house because of Mason's gambling debts. She had a heart attack. "Sarah," Mason said, his eyes filling with tears. "Is this a recording?" The voice on the radio replied. "Do you know what's in the load, Mason? Have you ever asked? Have you ever wondered why they paid so much for it?" Mason looked in the rearview mirror at the trailer behind him. That huge silver metal box glowed in the darkness. Sounds were coming from inside. Thump, thump. He had thought the cargo was shifting before, but this sound wasn't cargo shifting. This sound was someone pounding from inside. They were hitting the metal walls of the trailer from inside, and the blows were rhythmic. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. SOS. Mason's blood ran cold. Human trafficking, he thought. Are they transporting people to me? But the sealed paper said medical waste / biological hazard. If there were people inside and they couldn't breathe, Mason had to stop. He slammed on the brakes. He pressed down on the pedal with all his might. The truck slowed down. It stopped. Silence fell. There was no wind outside. An absolute silence reigned among those charred pillars. Mason grabbed his flashlight and crowbar. He opened the door. He stepped onto the step to climb down. But where he stepped, it wasn't asphalt. His boot sank into the ground. Soft, spongy ground. He held the flashlight down. The ground looked like asphalt, black and bumpy. But when Mason drove the crowbar into the ground, there was no sound of concrete breaking. Clack, the sound of skin being pierced came, and from where he had stuck the crowbar, from that crack, a dark red liquid, not black, began to seep out. The liquid was evaporating. It smelled like blood. Mason backed away. Where the hell am I? Just then, a light appeared from ahead on the road, out of the darkness. Not a car headlight, a figure standing by the side of the road, holding an old gas lamp. A hitchhiker. Mason climbed back into the cab, locked the door. He shone his headlights on the hitchhiker. The man stood with his back turned. He wore an old 1950s gas station jumpsuit. The words "the stomach" were written on the back of the jumpsuit. The man slowly turned around. Mason bit his hand to keep from screaming. The man had no face. More accurately, he had a face, but it was upside down. His mouth was on his forehead. His eyes were on his chin. Where his nose should have been, there was an ear-like hole, and the man raised his hand. With his thumb, he pointed behind him at Mason's back. His mouth opened, and his voice echoed directly inside Mason's mind, behind his closed windows. It's feeding time, Mason. Don't keep them waiting. Mason, terrified, slammed on the gas. The truck skidded. It tore through the flesh-like ground, splattering blood. As it lunged forward, He didn't swerve to avoid running over the hitchhiker. He drove right over him. Thud crunch. It sounded like popping a water-filled balloon. The truck shook. Mason didn't look in the rearview mirror. He couldn't. He just drove. The speedometer passed 120. But the road didn't end. There was no horizon. There was only that black, fleshy road, and those enormous ribs stretching into the sky. And the radio turned on again. This time it wasn't Sarah's voice. This time it was the sound coming from inside the trailer. The radio was broadcasting the sounds from inside the trunk. Screams, the muffled screams of hundreds of people drowning at the same time. And among them, a single clear sentence could be heard. "Where are you taking us, Dad?" Mason's daughter, little Emily. She had also died in that accident. "No," Mason shouted, pounding on the radio. "You're not real. I'm going crazy. This is a dream." The radio shattered, plastic buttons scattering everywhere. But the voice didn't stop. The voice wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. The voice was coming from the truck's engine, its ventilation system, the upholstery of the seat. The truck was talking. "More real than real, Mason. This is Highway 0. This is the digestive system. And you are just an enzyme that carries food." Mason looked at the windshield. Up ahead, at the end of the road, a massive structure appeared. It looked like a tunnel entrance, but it wasn't made of concrete. It resembled a huge, open mouth. A huge mouth with teeth, with stalactites, illuminated by a red light. And the truck, as if its brakes had failed, accelerated towards that mouth. Mason slammed on the brakes, but the pedal went nowhere. The pedal had melted when Mason Ray entered that huge, toothed mouth. He expected the sound of a crash, metal hitting rock, glass shattering, and then that endless darkness. Death should be like that, fast and loud. But when the truck plunged into that mouth, the sound it made was a wet, slopping sound, as if a giant boot had gotten stuck in mud. The world, illuminated by the headlights, suddenly narrowed. The tunnel wasn't made of concrete or rock as Mason had feared. It was a huge, moist esophagus, constantly contracting and relaxing in shades of pink and gray. The engine of the Peterbilt 389 had turned into a muffled growl inside this organic tunnel. The Peterbilt 389's engine had turned into a muffled growl inside this organic tunnel. The exhaust fumes couldn't escape, hitting the tunnel ceiling and bouncing back, seeping into the cabin. But the fumes no longer smelled like diesel. They smelled like burnt hair and rotten eggs. Logbook entry, illegible, shaky handwriting. Logbook entry, illegible, shaky handwriting. Time unknown. The heat is rising. The gauges aren't working. The speedometer melted. Seriously, the plastic melted and stuck the needle to the glass. The tunnel is pushing us down. The brakes aren't working. The gas pedal has gone soft under my foot. It's like stepping on an animal's tongue. The sounds from behind haven't stopped. Emily, Emily is there. I can hear her. Daddy, it's too hot, she says. God, what have I done? What is this load? The truck accelerated down the slope of the tunnel, or throat. Mason tried to control the steering wheel, but it was useless. The walls of the tunnel, like a swallowing throat, squeezed the truck and pushed it down into the deep darkness. Peristaltic movements. That term he'd seen in biology class came to mind. It's swallowing me, Mason whispered. His voice didn't echo inside the cabin. The cabin walls absorbed the sound, and then the transformation began. Mason felt a strange warmth in his hands, gripping the steering wheel. The leather-covered steering wheel. It was sweating. The leather-covered steering wheel was sweating. Mason wanted to pull his hands away, but he couldn't. His palms were stuck to the leather of the steering wheel. No, they weren't stuck. They were fused. Mason screamed in horror. He forced his left hand away. His skin peeled off, bleeding. But what he saw when he looked at the steering wheel froze his blood. The black leather covering on the steering wheel was cracked. No metal was visible underneath. Something white, ivory-colored, was visible underneath. Bone. The truck's steering wheel was turning into a massive spine bone. And the front panel, that plastic glove compartment, the panel with the radios, was softening, becoming veiny, and turning pink. The speedometer glass was bulging like an eyeball. The needle was turning left and right like a pupil. The truck was transforming from a machine into an organism before Mason's eyes. Metal was turning into flesh. The radio, now a fleshy protrusion, spoke again. The radio, now a fleshy protrusion, spoke again. This time there was no frequency. The voice came directly from inside that mass of flesh. Integration has begun, Mason. Resist. You are no longer the driver. You are the brain. The truck is. Your body. Fuck your integration, Mason yelled. He reached for the fire extinguisher on the side seat. He wanted to break the glass and jump. He wanted to stop, even if it meant scraping against the tunnel walls, to get off this damn thing. He slammed the fire extinguisher against the glass. Thud. The glass didn't break. The glass flexed like a transparent membrane, like an eye cornea. It flexed and threw the fire extinguisher back. There was no way out. Mason was sealed inside this biological prison. The camera angle shows the outside through the windshield. The image quality is poor. The colors are distorted. Everything looks like it's filtered through red and purple. The tunnel suddenly widens. The view through the windshield opens onto a vast void resembling a cave. But this is not a cave with stalactites and stalagmites. This is a massive internal organ with acid lakes, yellow bile water flowing down its walls. A stomach. Below, about 100 meters down, is a huge bubbling acid lake, a mixture of green and black. And on the lake, dozens, maybe hundreds of vehicles. Trucks, buses, old cars, a 1950s Cadillac, a 1970 Mustang, a modern Tesla, all floating in the acid lake, half melted. This is Highway Zero's final stop, the graveyard of lost vehicles. But they're not completely dead. A school bus floating in the acid, its headlights still flickering. Its wipers, like a desperate plea for help, banging against the glass. Vage, 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 vage. Mason's truck speeds down a ramp made of bones and cartilage, heading toward this acid lake. Mason hits the brakes. The dash cam microphone records Mason sobbing. Stop now, please stop. The truck stops at the edge of the acid lake at the last moment. The brakes lock up. The front of the truck hangs just a few meters from the acid lake. The smell from outside penetrates the cabin's filter and fills the interior. The smell of corroded metal and melting human flesh. Looking out the windshield, Mason sees movement in the middle of the acid lake. The liquid rises, and something enormous emerges from the lake. It's not a crane. It's a long, fleshy tentacle. At its end is a massive claw. The claw grabs the school bus, drifting in the lake. The bus's metal body crumples like a tin can, and from inside the bus, screams rise. Not children's screams. The bus itself is screaming. The high-pitched sound of metal bending transforms into the death scream of a living thing. The tentacle lifts the bus into the air and pulls it toward the darkness in the ceiling void, toward an invisible mouth. Crack. The bus splits in two. A yellow liquid and suitcases spill out. Mason's radio speaks. It's not your turn yet, Mason. Not yet. You're full. You're loaded. You need to unload. The delivery point is on the other side. Mason looks down the ramp. There is a narrow, swaying bridge made of vertebrae crossing the acid lake. It leads to the other side, to that dark, throbbing wall. I won't go there, says Mason. If I go there, I'll die. The voice replies, if you don't go there, your load will wake up. And believe me, Mason, you'd rather have that load wake up than melt in the acid. At that very moment, the voice comes from the trailer behind the truck. This time, it's not a thud. Scratching sound. Thousands of nails scratching at the metal walls from the inside. And a smell seeps into the cabin. From the back, from the sleeping compartment, the smell of the coffin, rotten orchids and burnt sugar. Mason looks in the rearview mirror. The coffin has completed its biological transformation. It is no longer a metal box, a semi-transparent, membrane-like sack, a giant cocoon. And inside, there are shadows moving inside. Not just one person, hundreds, a pile of flesh, stacked on top of each other, fused together, moving. And at the top, at the very top of that pile, there is a small handprint pressed against the glass. A small hand with 5 fingers. Emily's hand. Mason screams like he's gone mad. Open it, open the back. He throws whatever he can get his hands on: a pen, a thermos, loose change at the rear panel. The truck's engine roars. The truck shifts gears beyond Mason's control, and it moves toward that narrow, bone-like bridge. They will cross the acid lake, over the other drivers melting below, the other enzymes. When they reach the middle of the bridge, other things begin to rise from the acid lake. These are not tentacles. They are hands, giant, acid-eroded, skeletal human hands. They cling to the bridge. They reach for the truck. "Take us too," whispers the wind. "Take us too." A hand sticks to the truck step. It strains at the door handle. Mason presses the door lock button, but there is no button. The button has burst like a pimple. The door is fused with flesh. It won't open. The hand outside bangs on the window. A driver with no face, his skin melted away. "Mason," the driver shouts. "Don't wait your turn. Jump, jump and finish it." The truck shakes, as if disgusted by this uninvited guest. From the side, where the fuel tank is, a bone spear shoots out and pierces the driver outside. The driver silently falls into the acid pool. TISSS. The acid swallows him. Mason clings to the steering wheel. "Just the delivery," he says to himself. "Just the delivery. Drop off the cargo and go. Take the money and go. Save Emily and go." The truck reaches the opposite shore. They stop in front of the wall. The wall is a massive door, clenched like a sphincter muscle. The same writing is on it: Route 0, delivery point. The door slowly opens. A blinding white light and freezing air pour out from inside. After the hot, humid stomach, this cold air burns Mason's lungs. The truck enters, and the door closes behind them. Silence. The stomach's rumbling stops. Only the scratching sound inside the trailer remains. And now a melody, Emily's favorite lullaby. It's hummed from inside the trailer. Sleep and grow, walk step by step. When the truck stops, Mason feels the engine stall. But this time, the engine doesn't stop. The engine dies. It takes one last breath. The truck's biological life ends. Mission accomplished. You are no longer in flesh and bone, but in a dead body that is beginning to cool inside the truck. The steering wheel is getting cold. The panel is turning gray, and that small cover at the back, connecting the sleeping compartment to the cab, that small service cover, it slowly creaks open. The Peterbilt 389, also known as the Red Baron, breathed its last breath under Mason. The deep, biological gurgling from the engine block gave way to the silence of death. But this was not like a machine falling silent. It was like the heart of a giant animal stopping. The heat inside the cab plummeted rapidly. The ivory-colored spinal bones forming the steering wheel began to gray and calcify as they cooled. The fleshy tissue on the dashboard turned purple like a corpse and hardened. The truck was entering the rigor mortis phase. Mason zipped up his coat with trembling hands. His breath vaporized in the air. After that acid, like that hellish heat, this sudden cold clung to his sweaty clothes, penetrating him to the bone. From behind, the light seeping through the small service hatch connecting the sleeper cabin to the trailer illuminated Mason's face a pale, sickly yellow light. And that lullaby, Dandini, Dandini, Dastana. The cows have entered the garden. The voice was no longer a murmur, but a clear human voice. It was Emily's voice, but there was something strange about it. The voice didn't sound like it was coming from a record, but rather like it was echoing off a wet floor. And every now and then, it would stutter, repeating the same syllable. Dastana, Dastana, Tana, Tana. Mason whispered, "I'm coming, sweetheart." His logic had completely collapsed. Part of him knew this was a trap, but another part needed that voice. He grabbed the flashlight. He climbed into the sleeping compartment. The service hatch was sticky, like living tissue. Mason pushed it open completely with his shoulders. He crawled inside, into the darkness of the hold. Logbook entry. Time unknown. I'm inside the hold. This place isn't what I expected. No box. No pallet. This isn't a cargo hold. This is a hive. The walls, God, the walls are breathing. And those things are everywhere. No pallet. This isn't a cargo compartment. This is a hive. The walls, God, the walls are breathing. And everywhere, there are those things. Cocoons. Amber-colored, semi-transparent cocoons, hanging from the ceiling, embedded in the walls. There's something inside them. They're sleeping. Mason shone his lantern around. The trailer was much larger than it appeared from the outside. Inside, it resembled a Gothic cathedral, but it was built of bone and cartilage instead of stone. The ceiling was supported by enormous ribs, and the walls were covered with hexagonal cells like a honeycomb. Inside each cell hung cargo, suspended in an amber-colored liquid. Mason approached one. The thing inside was a human, a middle-aged man, wearing a swift transport uniform. His eyes were closed. A tube protruding from his mouth was attached to the cell wall. The man's chest rose and fell slowly. Mason looked at the next one. A woman. Her FedEx cap was still on her head. The next one. A young boy in a pizza delivery uniform. This trailer was not a cargo vehicle. This trailer was a collection point for all those drivers, couriers, and passengers who had disappeared on Highway 0. They weren't dead. They were being stored as spare parts. Mason. The voice came from the very back of the trailer, from the deepest darkness. Mason turned his flashlight that way. There, in front of the trailer's rear doors, something was sitting on the ground. A little girl in a pink dress. Her back was turned. Her hair was blonde and curly, like Emily's. She was sitting on the ground, playing with a toy. "Emily," Mason said. His voice trembled. "Daddy." The little girl giggled. "Daddy, why are you late?" Mason started running toward her. He forgot the pain in his ribs. "I'm sorry," he said, crying. "I got lost, but I'm here. I'll get you out of here." He reached out to touch her shoulder. Just as he was about to touch her, her head turned 180 degrees. But her face wasn't Emily's face. She had no face. Where her face should have been, there was a wet, pink, fleshy mass. On it were dozens of small, toothed mouths, and all those mouths spoke at once. "You're late, you're late, delivery time." This was not a child. This was a tumor growing from the floor of the dungeon, mimicking the voices of its victims to lure them to itself. A parasite. Mason recoiled in horror. "What are you?" The tumor girl stood up. She had no legs. From the waist down, she was attached to the veins. In the floor of the truck. "I am the bait, Mason. I am the memory. I am your conscience." One of the mouths on the tumor screamed. This sound was not Emily's, but the sound of the truck's horn. "Toot." Mason brought the heavy metal flashlight in his hand down on the tumor. Crack. The tumor exploded. Pus and black blood spurted out. The sound stopped. "Lies," Mason yelled, repeatedly striking and crushing the tumor. All lies. When he caught his breath, only a pile of flesh remained of the tumor. At that very moment, the massive doors at the back of the truck shook with a loud clatter. Someone outside was opening the doors. "CRRRR." The bone locks broke. The flesh doors swung open on both sides. Inside, in stark contrast to the dim yellow glow of the dungeon, a blinding, sterile, ice-blue light flooded in. Mason squinted, covering his face with his arm. A cold mist filled the room from outside. At the threshold, before the light, enormous silhouettes appeared. 3 people, but they weren't human. They were at least 3 meters tall. They wore transparent, plastic garments resembling butcher's aprons. Their faces were covered with surgical masks, but the masks were not made of fabric, but of human skin. They held enormous, rusty hooks and electric saws in their hands. These were not customers. These were the disposal team. The figure in front pointed the hook in his hand at Mason. It didn't speak. It only gave a raspy breath. The other 2 entities behind it entered the back of the truck. Their steps were heavy. They shook the floor. They headed for those cocoons on the walls, those sleeping drivers. One of them reached the cell where the swift transport driver was. It hooked the driver's shoulder. Cart. Before the driver woke up, it pulled him out of the cell like a piece of meat. The tubes attached to the driver's body snapped. Black liquids spilled onto the floor. The creature threw the driver over its shoulder and carried him outside. Mason froze where he stood. "This is a slaughterhouse," he thought. "This is a slaughterhouse, and we are the cattle." The second creature turned toward Mason. It activated the electric saw in its hand. VINNNN. The saw's sound was high-pitched and thin, as if designed to cut bone. It was coming toward Mason. Mason had nowhere to run. His back was against the wall. His front was blocked by these butchers. "I'm the driver," Mason yelled, holding the flashlight like a weapon. "I'm not cargo. I brought it. That was the deal." The creature stopped. It tilted its head to the side. Then it reached its hand behind Mason, toward the floor of the trailer. Mason looked behind him. There, from beneath the crushed tumor, a thick, black cord was attached to the floor. The cord stretched toward Mason's leg. Looking closer, the end of the cord was already attached to Mason's leg. It had entered his boot and fused with his flesh. Mason hadn't even felt it. He had become one with the truck. He was no longer an independent being. He was part of this truck. The entity spoke in a raspy voice. The sound was like ice cracking. "The driver is dead. You are just cargo." Mason pulled out his knife to cut the cord on his leg. "No," he said. "No, I'm Mason Ray. I'm getting out of here." He plunged the knife into his leg. He tried to cut the cord. There was no pain. There was no blood. Black oil from the truck flowed from the cut. Mason looked at his leg in horror. There was no bone beneath the cut. There was metal. His own biology had changed too. He was transforming as well. The entity brought the saw closer to Mason's face. With one last effort, Mason raised his left arm, which hadn't transformed yet, and struck the entity's mask. The mask fell off. The face underneath. It was the front grille of a Peterbilt truck, a horrific fusion of metal and flesh. The entity grabbed Mason by the throat and lifted him into the air. Mason kicked his legs, but the cord on his leg pulled him back down. The entity hurled Mason out of the trailer into that blinding light. The cord snapped. Mason fell into the void. He landed on a cold metal floor. He raised his head. This was a massive, endless warehouse, shelves reaching up to the sky, and on every shelf there were thousands, millions of trailers, each one sealed, each one full. This was Highway Zero's logistics center, and right in front of Mason stood the warehouse manager. He looked like a normal-sized human, suit and tie, clean cut. He held a tablet in his hand. He looked at Mason and smiled. "Mason Ray," said the man. His voice was like that jazz DJ on the radio. "Right on time. But we're missing something." Adam typed something on the tablet. The soul section on the delivery form was left blank. "You spent it on the way." Adam snapped his fingers. The massive butchers behind him pounced on Mason. "Soulless bodies don't go to the warehouse," Adam said. "They go to recycling." As Mason was being dragged away by the butchers, he saw a huge hatch open in the warehouse floor. Beneath the hatch were huge, spinning gears and grinders. And beneath the grinders, fresh, new asphalt was being poured. The asphalt of Highway Zero. Mason screamed one last time. "Are we the road?" he yelled. "Are you turning us into the road?" Adam smiled and waved. "Have a good trip, Mason. The next driver will run you over." The halogen lamps, hanging from the ceiling of the massive factory, illuminated the metal. Platform masonry was being dragged on with a cold, sterile light. Butcher-like creatures had grabbed Mason by the arms and legs, pulling him toward that dreadful machine. The machine was the size of an apartment building. Into its enormous mouth, resembling a funnel, were thrown shredded trucks, crushed trailers, and emptied drivers. At the bottom of the funnel were two enormous cylinders rotating in opposite directions. On top of the cylinders, diamond-tipped teeth pulverized, crushed, and mixed everything. And from beneath the machine, that black, smoke-filled, fresh mixture poured out. The asphalt of Highway 0. Mason thrashed about desperately. "Let me go. I'm not a road. I'm a human being." He tried to grab the railing at the edge of the platform, but his fingers slipped off the metal. The skin on his hands was peeling off, revealing the gray, metallic tissue underneath, which had hardened considerably. Mason realized with horror that his body wasn't cooling down. It was heating up. It was heating up like an engine block. It wasn't blood flowing through his veins, but hydraulic fluid and diesel fuel. The transformation was nearing completion. At that moment, the man in the suit, standing in the observation tower on the platform, spoke into the microphone in his hand. His voice was clear and velvety, loud enough to drown out the factory's noise. "Do you think you're human, Mason? You are all just pieces, cogs in a machine. The world needs roads to turn, and roads require sacrifice. Highway 0 connects two worlds. Your flesh will be crushed under the wheels of others, so that they too can carry their own burdens." Mason headbutted the butcher's mask. The bone metal horn, protruding from his forehead, pierced the butcher's face. The butcher staggered, his grip loosening. Mason threw himself to the ground. Crawling, he tried to reach the edge of the platform, the machine's control panel. "Stop, stop," he growled. His voice was no longer human. It was the hissing sound of a truck's air brakes. Releasing, he reached the panel. He slammed his fist down on the red button marked emergency stop. Bam! The button broke, but the machine didn't stop. On the contrary, it accelerated. The DJ's laughter echoed from the speakers. "There is no emergency here, Mason. This place operates on the continuous flow principle. That button was just decoration to give hope, just like the exit signs on the highway. None of them are real." And the butchers pounced on Mason again. They lifted him up. They brought him to the mouth of the funnel. The heat rising from below burned Mason's face. The sound of the grinder was like thousands of bones breaking at once. Crunch, crunch, vinn. Mason looked down. Between the cylinders, he saw the grotesque dance of crushed metal and flesh. His own truck, the Red Baron, had just been thrown in. As the truck's cab was crushed, its horn sounded one last time. a painful farewell, and the truck's parts disappeared between the grinder's gears, turning into a black slurry. With one last effort, Mason grabbed the butcher's arm. "If I'm going," he shouted, his voice metallic and raspy, "you're coming with me." Using all the hydraulic power in his body, he pulled the butcher toward him, and both lost their balance. They fell into the void. Airflow, heat, and then, thud, they landed on the cylinders. Mason felt his left leg being caught by the grinder. There was no pain, only pressure, enormous pressure. His metallized bones cracked. The butcher next to him screamed and shattered. His flesh mixed with Mason's metal. Before losing consciousness, Mason looked up one last time at that watchtower. DJ was calmly taking notes. As the grinder's gears reached his chest, Mason whispered his final words. "I am the pit." Crack. The grinder swallowed Mason Ray. The machine shook for a moment. The gears strained. Mason's will, his metal, his rage, disrupted the machine's rhythm. But it couldn't stop it. Black, smoke-filled asphalt mixture continued to pour out from under the machine. But this time the mixture was different, darker, more coarse, and from within came sounds. Final report. Date November 17, 2025. Location Nevada Desert / I-80. Source State Police Patrol Report. Officer Sergeant K. Miller. At approximately 04:30, an abandoned truck trailer was found in the middle of the desert at mile 44 of the I-80 highway. The trailer belonged to Swift Transport, but its license plates had melted. The interior of the trailer was empty. Only strange, organic residue remained on its walls. It resembled dried resin. The interior of the trailer was empty. Only on its walls was a strange, organic residue. It resembled dried resin. But that wasn't the strange part. About 100 meters ahead of where the trailer was located, there was a patch of freshly poured asphalt on the road. Highway crews stated they had not been working in that area that night. The patch was about the size of an 18-wheeler. The patch was about the size of an 18-wheeler truck. It was pitch black, it was still hot, and it was misshapen. Right in the middle of the patch, there was a strange bulge in the texture of the asphalt. If you looked closely, this bulge resembled the face of a person screaming in agony. The mouth of the face was open. Officer Miller added this note to his report. "I swear that when the wind blew, a sound came from that patch of asphalt. Not a whistle. Hissing sound. And it was as if it was saying, 'Turn around.' My radio went out as we passed that spot. The frequencies got scrambled. And for a moment, just for a second, I heard a little girl crying on the radio, and a man yelling, 'Don't brake, just drive.' Highway 0 has claimed another victim. And Mason Ray, he's no longer a driver. He's a mound, waiting in the middle of the Nevada desert, on that unmarked detour, With every tire that rolls over him, every truck that passes, his bones shatter once more. But he's there, waiting, warning, or perhaps seeking new companions.